Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Whenever you discover this incredible conversation at really the most advantageous time, considering the gravity of a lot of things that are going on, it's my great honor and opportunity to introduce William K. Black on August 6th, 2025, to discuss a plan to deal with what appears to be an onslaught of criminality, of things that are confusing the American people in a way that no one has yet demonstrated a thorough and complete, shall we say, view of how to move past what we're all in the midst of. And on that note, what I want to do is just introduce Bill from the standpoint of Bill, I've known you for some time, working with you, obviously on the con, and you've given us so much of your time and your really your mentorship to lead us forward. But just to kind of reset the table of who you are and what you know and why we want to listen to you, is that you're an economist, you're a lawyer, you're a white collar criminologist, and you were a prominent federal financial regulator. But you were also a serial whistleblower. You blew the whistle on 5 U.S. senators who became known as the infamous Keating Five, plus the Speaker of the House and two heads of your federal agency. You were the lead staff strategist and implementer of Ed Gray's financial regulatory and prosecutorial strategy that averted a juggernaut of looting by elite bank and thrift CEOs in the 1980s. That elite fraud epidemic grew so much more rapidly than the bubble that produced the great financial crisis of 2008, that it seemed certain that it would dwarf the GFC. Instead, federal thrift and banking regulators stopped the rapidly expanding epidemic of elite financial CEO looters and prevented the fraud epidemic from causing any material recession. The regulators, FBI, and the federal DOJ prosecutors worked together to secure over 7,000 felony convictions in cases the Department of Justice judged major. Each of those efforts remains the most successful action against elite robber barons anywhere in the world in any century. You have drawn on that experience and your expertise in law, regulation, economics, whistleblowing, and elite white-collar crime to propose a strategy to minimize the harm President Trump can cause, and then to restore the rule of law. You have stressed that we need not only a no king's agenda, but also a no robber baron's mission. How bad was the strategic situation for honest financial regulators in 1984?
It was hopeless by any objective measure. In that era, there were 300 savings and loans, and the slowest growing fraudster of those 300, there were of an industry of 3,000, grew at over 50% a year. That's double the growth rate of the lead up to the great financial crisis. But when you double a growth rate, it doesn't mean the losses are twice as big, it's exponential. And so it depends on the time period. And the savings and loan debacle would have become a catastrophe, dwarfing the great financial crisis in roughly 5 to 6 years. But Ed Gray decided to become the original whistleblower and put people like me in key positions to stop this massive expansion of the fraudulent firms. So that's the first big thing. And as you said, economists say it didn't produce the savings and loan debacle, any meaningful recession. Compass that with the cost of the great financial crisis and the resultant loss of productivity. Economists conservatively estimate that at $41.7 trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion loss of GDP in present value. So that's just a startling thing. And then from a position where there wasn't even a criminal referral system, They built a system that was so effective, as you said, that it produced thousands of convictions of elite white collar criminals, the robber barons of that era. And the prosecutions were hyper prioritized to go after the elite CEOs, and they had a conviction rate that ranged from 90 to 96% against elite CEOs. So, as you say, the greatest success ever in the world, in world history, in prosecuting elites, nothing comes close. And all of this was done over extraordinary political power by the robber barons and their political allies to prevent it, such that, for example, the Reagan administration threatened to criminally prosecute Ed Gray, the head of the agency, on the grounds that he was closing too many insolvent thrifts. Now think about that. That's his job. And they were going to prosecute him. They threatened to prosecute him to do it. They tried to drive him from office. They wouldn't extend this term, even though he produced these two miracles that I've discussed, stopping this epidemic of fraud in its tracks without causing any economic catastrophe and getting all these prosecutions. You would think that would make him a hero. Instead, that made him absolutely anathema to not just the Republicans, but the Democrats. A majority of the House of Representatives, a majority of both parties in the House of Representatives, combined to co-sponsor a resolution calling on Ed Gray to cease re-regulating the savings and loans, which was stopping the fraudsters. Every single member of the House leadership in both parties agreed to that. 5 US senators came after us. And Ed Gray knew it would destroy his career, but went forward anyway. In my case, Keating sued me for $400 million. And he's a lawyer, put in writing to his chief political fixer, highest priority, get black, kill him dead, type of thing. Joe Selby, the nation's top financial regulator, period, which means the top financial regulator in the world, took the position in Texas, which is the epicenter of these fraud schemes, knowing that he was gay, but that he would be outed and destroyed by these sleazy CEOs. And he still took the position, and his career was eliminated. And the Speaker of the House, a Democratic representative from Texas, Jim Wright, called up the head of our agency, Ed Gray, and said, can't you fire this guy on the grounds that he was gay? So, we are used to retaliation. The point of all of this is we know how to strategize in impossible circumstances to turn impossible circumstances into not just, 50-50 battles, but staggering wins. And we know that whistleblowers are the key. And we know that defeating the robber barons and their political allies is the key. And we know that that's bipartisan, right? Those 6 prominent elected officials you talked about that I blew the whistle on, I'm a Democrat. 5 of the 6 were Democrats. I didn't hesitate for a second to do that, nor would any of Ed Gray's people have hesitated for a second to do that, right? So we have an incredible advantage in America. We have more and far better whistleblowers than anybody in the world. In fact, the rest of the world combined. doesn't equal the United States. And in this crisis, the number of American whistleblowers has surged because Trump wants the Justice Department and other agencies to do so many things that are unethical, illegal, and destroy democracy and maim and kill sometimes literally tens of millions of people. The USAID cuts in terms of extreme poverty, for example, are the best estimate is that the death toll will probably be something around 16 million. So all of this has motivated an unprecedented number of people to come forward. And that's really good because what have we seen from all the powerful people, right? The nation's top journalists, the nation's top publishers, the nation's top media companies, the nation's top universities, the nation's top law schools, the nation's top universities, with some rare exceptions that deserve great praise. They have not only capitulated, they have typically surrendered in advance before even being extorted. So what we need, but we can take advantage of, is that we also have an astonishing number, now numbering in the thousands of people who are federal employees and are willing to be whistleblowers. They are the best among us. They are the bravest. I don't care anything about brave talk. I don't care about giving a speech with senatorial, privilege and such that protects you from lawsuits. These whistleblowers are laying it all on the line. And because America is a federalist system where the states have continuing sovereign power, and because many of those state legislatures and attorney generals are controlled by people who are not MAGA, there is absolutely no reason in the world why there shouldn't be thousands of hearings and thousands of subpoenas for documents and for testimony, and then thousands of presentations in every congressional district of the best among us, the whistleblowers, who can tell us exactly what is happening, why it's so wrong, and why they were willing to take actions that will crush, in many ways, their professional careers. At the biggest law firms, partners caved because they were in terror at making $15 million a year instead of $20 million a year because of Trump's retaliation. The typical whistleblower has a mortgage, student debt. They are the courageous people. And we use, if the state legislators, no one is counting on the Democratic Party leadership, obviously, at this juncture. The popularity of the Democratic Party as an opposition party is, frighteningly low and such. We don't need them to follow this fight strategy. We can use, and by doing what the whistleblowers want, they want to blow the whistle to the public. They want to warn the public while it is still possible to save democracy, to restore the rule of law. So we need state legislatures and state AGs. And if it takes Democrats to do this, if there are no honest Republicans anymore, well, then there are dozens of states where either the equivalent of the House or the Senate, the state House or a Senate, can hold these hearings and can subpoena the whistleblowers, which will break you free of restrictions, for example, under non-disclosure agreements, which are very common to try to suppress whistleblower testimony. And that's just the first stage. After we've done that, these whistleblowers can tell their story publicly. Let's find the best of them. We can choose among thousands of these brave whistleblowers who have incredible expertise about these matters, many of whom are brilliant and can tell their story in a compelling way, and work with them so that instead of all the stilted stuff in these stupid legislative hearings, what each representative gets 5 minutes and they go back and forth and they mostly yell at each other and such, you get a completely disjointed narrative. Half the people there are trying to help the corrupt people. But we can go into create our town hall meetings built around these whistleblowers, and we can find the absolute best whistleblowers in terms of their ability to tell a compelling story about what actually happened. What was so terrible, so sleazy, so harmful to the public that they felt it was their duty to risk everything to tell us the truth.
Wow, Bill, it reminds me of so much of what we've covered since I've had the great opportunity to go on this journey with you. And I'm reminded of a statement that you used to make all the time. Second verse, same as the first. I'm thoughtful of what features of the Trump regime make successful resistance to our corrupt king and robber barons seem impossible, and yet reminds you so painfully of the 1980s.
Right. But also create the Achilles heel. Right. So they think it's really good to have a system based on lies. Right. So you can't get a prominent position in the Trump administration unless you're willing to embrace all the lies that the dear leader tells. Right. You have to say that he won a prior election that he lost. You have to say that this attempt to overthrow the government and to cheat, and lie, and steal never happened. You have to say that all these people that assaulted police officers were peaceful flower gatherers,
Sure.
type of thing. Right. You have to lie and lie and lie, and that is just enough to get hired. And then after you get hired, whatever lie the dear leader wants told, including that unemployment came down dramatically when it actually went up, right? Everything in the government is now subject to the compelling thing that is paramount. It overweighs everything. Do you hear Trump talking about honor, loyalty, democracy, justice, ethics, sympathy even for the victims, child victims of rape? No. The man has none of those things. He is the worst among us. And you have to not only lie for this man, you have to North Korean style essentially get down on your knees and genuflect to him and his alleged brilliance and such, because he's a pathetic, egomaniacal individual who realizes inside what a small person he is. Just a small, disgusting, revolting predator, right?
Well, when you were talking about, you know, does he ever, appeal to honor or courage or anything? No, or the victims. What he said was, "I wish Ghislaine Maxwell well," and
Yeah.
then she, of course, got transferred. Look, I know that everybody out there is completely disoriented.
Yeah, but let me close this loop with
Yeah.
just 1 second. That means in critical areas that I am most familiar with, June Carbone, our viewers will know, and I were both federal programs branch attorneys. This is the division where over 60% of the attorneys have resigning in protest. Over half of all the leaders of the unit of the branch have already resigned. And that number is going to grow. And the only people left are either in such desperate financial shape because of student debts, or are actually the tiny fraction of people in that unit that would be evil. So those people are being told they must lie in court. Now that, for an attorney, any attorney, much less a Justice Department attorney, much less a federal programs branch attorney, which is an elite unit to defend with integrity government programs that includes some of the cream skim best of the best. No, that's why you get so many resignations. So that group, if we bring the cases, the challenges, the legal challenges, they will be compelled by their bosses in many cases to lie. And that is A, a crime, B, it's in violation of everything the Justice Department has stood for historically, and C, that can get you sanctioned by the judge and disbarred by the bar associations. And if that happens, even a few times, it's going to boom around the Justice Department. And the willingness of even the worst maggot lawyers to lie for this guy is going to vanish. So we can hit an immense pressure point. The office that has to defend the statutory authority and constitutionality of federal actions when Trump is blatantly causing them to engage in unethical actions. So we can not only further cleanse that office of its sleaziest elements, but we will produce, if we bring these actions, even more whistleblowers. And those whistleblowers will be able to give chapter and verse with key documents proving that the Justice Department ordered them and the administration ordered them to deceive the courts for corrupt purposes. And that will strike hammer blows even with the most cynical MAGA defenders. So we can target the Achilles heel of this administration. And we can turn it into a situation where they are being hit by public presentations, as I say, in every congressional district in America on a weekly basis, giving chapter and verse of how they lied and the enormous harm that it caused and the corrupt purposes it was designed to fulfill by some of the most compelling and bravest folks among us. And it will be hammer blow after hammer blow after hammer blow after hammer blow. And one of the things that this does is it turns the weekend warriors, the Democratic leadership types, into, oh my God, I got to get in front of this. And they may have to simulate that they have a spine.
Well, I know that what I was about to say earlier was that there's a lot of disorientation. You can see it, you can feel it all over, from mainstream media to leaders on the Democratic side not really having a plan of action. But this is far from hopeless, isn't it, Bill?
Absolutely. And remember, again, legislative hearings, I've testified before something like 20 legislative and special purpose, task force hearings to investigate the causes of the savings and loan debacle and the causes of the great financial crisis. And all of these things use these multiple commissioners or multi-members, and they go back and forth after every 5 minutes. And it's, again, there's nothing coherent. There's no story and such. That's not how skilled lawyers operate. Our expertise as trial lawyers is narrative, is telling the story in an understandable and compelling way where you understand just how evil one group is and the incredible bravery of the folks, the whistleblowers, who have risked everything to bring it to your attention, so that because they want to protect you, the public. Now, on top of that, so that's our fight agenda. But on top of that, we have a restore agenda, which is restoring the rule of law, restoring democracy, and doing justice to these whistleblowers. And that program has a couple of obvious benefits, but here are two more subtle ones. First, it will greatly encourage whistleblowers to come forward. If they know we are treating them as heroes and doing everything possible to get their message out to the public in this narrative form that I talked about, because these meetings in the districts, we're not going to do it by stupid committee rules. We're going to have one-on-one of a person talking with a whistleblower and bringing out the story. And we're going to pick the most compelling whistleblowers who can tell the best story and the best questioners that can tell the best story. So that's a huge advantage. As we do that, and as we create this promote agenda where we create rewards for for the whistleblowers, that will encourage more whistleblowers to come forward. Because right now, of course, you're thinking of a whistleblower. What happens? I risk my entire career, and what happens to me? How many whistleblowers have you heard from? A handful, an absolute handful, and in usually weird circumstances, as opposed to, a 60-minute conversation in which they tell the story of what compelled them to do these things. But the second key advantage of this system of restoring American rule of law and democracy is it'll smoke out the people who simply oppose Trump's robber barons. They want their own robber barons who are closely tied to them to have power and to make them richer and more famous and more powerful. So we want to get rid, by making folks step up. By folks, I mean elected officials, particularly the leadership. If they're not willing to sign on to the promote, the restore agenda, to restore rule of law and to restore democracy to America, if they're not willing to crush the robber barons, if they're not willing to say, yeah, absolutely right, no kings, but no robber barons either, because every robber baron is a wannabe king. right? Where there are so many prominent Democrats, for example, who are absolutely in bed with robber barons. And they will not sign on to the Restore program. We want to know that.
This is a lot, and it's really cutting to the core of everything that we're in the midst of. Can you please give me a 3-minute recap of the fight platform?
Sure. The fight platform is what's our huge advantage? Whistleblowers. So let's get the whistleblowers. How do you get the whistleblowers? Well, whistleblowers often cannot talk publicly because they have some version of a non-disclosure agreement, for example. But those NDAs can be broken by subpoenas. So we initially have the state legislatures, committees, and attorney generals, who often have this power as well, to subpoena the testimony and record production by the whistleblowers, right? So that safeguards the whistleblowers for what is the usual strategy of the robber barons, which is to try to bankrupt them through the non-disclosure agreement, bankrupt and silence them through the non-disclosure agreement. You have two choices, right? You can talk, in which case we will bankrupt you. And your kids will be, join you in being homeless. It's just that awful, but we can stop that. Second, we get no traction with whistleblowers. They're barely testifying at all because it's being left exclusively to the federal government, and the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. So they almost always forbid whistleblowers to testify or structure their testimony so narrowly that none of the useful stuff comes out. Well, we can work with the state legislatures and particularly with the AGs, state attorney generals, to do that differently. But I give you caution. The incentives of politicians are often perverse in terms of these hearings, right? They want their 5 minutes of making the news by asking the questions, and many of them would just as soon fight with the other side as opposed to actually bring out the whistleblower's testimony and show why it's important. And you can see from their perspective, you sit there in a committee listening to nonsense from the other side for 3 hours, and you get to ask maybe 2 5-minute questions. There's not much joy in that. But that doesn't have to be the only way to do it. You can have informal legislative meetings, and you can have whoever is the most skilled questioner, which typically is none of the elected folks. It's the staff attorney for the committee, right, who actually has skills in this matter. And you just hold that hearing and you invite the press. You can put them under oath even if you want in those circumstances. May or may not count officially for the state, but no big deal. And you can present that testimony and you can arrange interviews by the key press and you can illustrate with huge blow-ups the key testimony and all that good type of stuff. But even more than that, as I've emphasized, you can have non-hearings after that point, which don't involve the legislators at all, in which they simply, the whistleblower, working with a skilled trial attorney who knows how to present a compelling narrative, or a news reporter who's good at those type of things, or a podcaster who's good at all those things. I don't care. All of them work for me. Right? Whoever's good at this can work with these whistleblowers and hone. You get better with practice, right? This ability, this story And it's going to be the type of thing that people are going to drive for 90 minutes to hear. And they're going to bring their younger kids, the adolescents, and say, this is what I hope for you. This is a whistleblower. He or she risked everything. And they did it for you. Learn from them. Learn from their example. Learn from their disclosures. Right? Speak truth to power.
Well, we're reminded of this a lot at the moment. Why? In the case of Epstein, in the case of now mainstream media has suddenly decided to pay attention to the victims 20 years later. We've seen story after story after story of Virginia Giuffre before she committed suicide this past April, and others with her, that went to every mainstream media organization to tell their story, even before, obviously, Epstein was arrested the second time after the Alex Acosta stuff. But it's a reminder that for whistleblowers watching this, that en masse, given just this unbelievable cataclysmic bulldozing of corruption that we're all in the midst of, the truth has to break through. And this plan is to, again, fight, but to restore. You started off with fight with the whistleblowers and restore based on integrity to clip the kleptocrats. Can you remind me now, in a shorter version, if you may, just to recap the Restore platform, given what we just discussed again with the Fight platform?
Sure. The Restore platform is, as I say, to reinstall democracy, end and reinstate a rule of law, and end the reign not just of kings, but also these robber barons, right? So I deliberately designed it to be something that should have enormously broad appeal, right? So it's not huge asks of anybody to take devastating political positions, for example. I mean, the three things I've just said, those should be no-brainers, right? In which, especially after this campaign, it's not going to harm you politically. It's going to propel you forward, right? So what types of things would it have? Well, people that have watched our podcasts or the con will know what we want to do is get rid of the criminogenic environments that spur elite fraud and corruption. And a criminogenic environment is just one that has really perverse incentives that encourage elite fraud and corruption. So we want to undo many Trump actions that, for example, eliminated the the enforcement of laws against bribing government officials abroad, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Right? He said, we will not enforce that law. Well, we're going to not only bring it back, but we're going to supercharge the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act under the Restore program. We have a statute that the robber barons pushed for successfully in the Clinton administration. Now, Clinton, to his credit, actually vetoed it. It was passed over his veto by largely Democrats who were in the tank with the robber barons. It's the Public Securities Litigation Reform Act. And that jargony stuff actually meant, let's make it really hard to sue, way harder than normal for a civil suit, to sue corporations for fraudulent treatment of the shareholders. So let's get rid of that. We want to restore whistleblower protections. We want to create funds. So the Trump administration has removed effectively the financial incentive system that wasn't available in my era that I was talking about, that was introduced after the dot-com, the Enron era scandals. And those laws, they don't want to enforce anymore. So we want to enforce them again.
Right.
It's simply saying we want the rule of law to prosecute fraud, for example. So there have been a series of Supreme Court decisions that say, well, it's okay to be corrupt. It's kind of, just common. So you can say, as a state official, this is a recent Supreme Court decision, hey guys, referring to the robber barons, I've been really good to you. I've passed all this legislation that has really made you rich. You should reward me by making political contributions to me. Right? So just saying the quiet part out loud, the quid pro quo. And the Supreme Court said, well, that's not a crime. Like, of course it's a crime. Anybody else in the world, it would be a crime. What are you talking about? It's not a crime. Right? And such. So all of those types of things, we would restore to what the law used to say, which is basically that, no, you don't get any immunity. No kings. And again, we're saying no kings and no robber barons. So overturn the immunity provisions to Trump and all future presidents and such. This is absurd that you can kill your political opponent and that you would have immunity because you thought it over and you thought it was good for America to kill your political opponent. I mean, that's not only does it make the president a king, it makes the president a homicidal maniac. Right? That's not what any American wants.
Not to mention a protector of pedophiles, to remind everybody.
Yeah. So that's our agenda for restoration. We're going to restore the rule of law so it's effective against elite corruption and elite fraudsters and CEO fraudsters and predators again. Now, who's going to oppose that?
Anyone corrupt?
Anyone you should ever vote for? So if, say, hypothetically, a bunch of leaders in the Democratic Party say, oh, no, we don't want that, we wouldn't be able to raise funds. I want to know that.
Amen. You're getting right to the heart of the matter. And, you and your colleagues are basically in semi-retirement, and you're stepping in and leaning into this moment in American history that's under siege by a ocean of lies to basically protect the wicked and the guilty that have turned the law upside down and perverted everything that you have done your entire career. I want to emphasize to those that are viewing this for the first time, you please like and subscribe, but most importantly, share. Because no one is demonstrating what William K. Black is saying now, not to mention has done his entire career. He and his colleagues, as he said at the outset, put away over 7,000 white-collar, high-level executives in prison for what at that time was a contagion that was much smaller than what ultimately became the great financial crisis that we never held accountable. We actually stimulated more money through all sorts of methodologies that have enabled more and more corruption and criminality to this point right now that I refer to the Trump presidency as the RICO presidency. And to demonstrate once again, Bill has laid out a fight platform. I can't think of anything more American than fighting against tyranny. That's why we were born to begin with, not to mention against slavery and fascism, all of which share the same similarities, but to restore the law through the integrity of the law. And I have to ask you this to kind of close this out. Should we expect on the other side of this accountability if millions of us come together to unify behind this platform? Bill, would there be accountability on the other side of this?
Absolutely. It's because we can turn this. I mean, we have been dealt lemons. We have been dealt rotten lemons, in massive quantities. We can turn this into a win. And we can turn this into a win by doing nothing sleazy. We can turn it into a win by doing acts of integrity in which the bravest among us, the whistleblowers, expose the evil that's being done in its specifics in a narrative form that is compelling and understandable to the typical American person. And it just is basically, again, it's like President Lincoln said, we can do it all. We can succeed brilliantly by appealing to the angels of our better nature.
Yeah, again, I could not be more grateful and inspired. We've been on a long journey together, but we're just getting started on this to dig into the trenches. And we implore all of you out there watching this to share. We need to get to the whistleblowers. They need to understand that we have a mechanism to move forward, and we're going to be revealing much more of this. But I would also encourage you to watch our work in the con at www.thecon.tv and to please explore and further watch, share, and subscribe and like to all things that are coming down throughout social media with our effort called the New Untouchables. And I'll give you the last word, Bill.
Yeah, and get in touch with your state legislators, right? I don't care which party, both parties. Find also your whoever represents you locally, but also whoever chairs the key investigative committees, and say, I want this done.
Bill, if we don't turn the tables now, what are we looking at in your opinion?
Tens of millions of people will die around the world. American democracy will be a figment, as cheap and gaudy as the gold veneer Trump has splashed all over the White House and such. So you'll have the patina that we were once a great nation, and within it'll be lead, which I remind you is highly poisonous.
My God, people, if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what is. We have to elevate truth above the madness of lies, and we need that with courage and commitment, of which we have in magnitudes. Join us, please.
Who, personally, the person in the street need not show extraordinary courage. The whistleblowers are showing that extraordinary courage. Just listen and promote wherever possible and make it a national communication that takes place, as I say, in every district in America on a weekly basis, in which you can go and learn from the bravest and best among us how awful the folks are and how much harm and how much contempt they have for the American people, for democracy, and for the rule of law, and how deeply they are in the septic tank with the robber barons.
It is that gross. It is that gross. And I'm going to close with what I frequently close with My truth bomb riffs, Bill, and you're the one who really taught me this and showed me kind of like Lady Liberty holding up the light of truth and justice and liberty and justice for all. Because when you live in truth, you live in light. When you live a lie, you're depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you lie, inside you die. Stop lying, America. Stop buying lies. The time to turn the tables and elevate the truth to become a nuclear reaction vector of truth is now. There is no time to waste. On behalf of myself, Patrick Lovell, the new Untouchables, and of course, William K. Black, do not hesitate. Like, subscribe, share, and check out The Con at thecon.tv. Thank you, Bill, for everything.
The Bible says, all those that doeth evil hateth the light and run from it. Whistleblowers bring the light. Help us bring the light.
It is our turn, America, to lean into this. Thank you. Onwards and upwards, Bill. Take care, everyone.